Last time on The Sims 2, Jack Sleazy moved into Pleasant View, intending to take advantage of the neighborhood's weak child labor laws to establish an empire built off the work of his offspring. And it was going really well too. Well, for Jack anyway, not so much for Jeff and Jody, who spent most of their free time toiling away on the family farm. However, things would take a tragic turn during Christmas as the Sleazy family tree caught fire, and Jack lost his life when attempting to protect his little investments. With the children whisked away by social services, the house would soon go up for sale, but it wouldn't take too long to find a new buyer. Jimmy James moves into the neighborhood seeking to make his fortune, but unlike the property's previous owner, Jimmy was a DIY type of guy. Almost immediately after moving in, Jimmy officially announces that he was opening up a new business and promptly got to work cleaning up the place and completing the necessary redecorations and renovations. But he would keep the mysterious urn that he found, as he felt that it really just tied the whole room together. Now that all the work on the store itself was finished, Jimmy was eager to open up, but there was just one slight problem. He didn't have anything to sell. Lacking any skills and already being 7,000 simoleons in the hole, Jimmy decides to sell some of the few things he actually knows how to make: lunch meat sandwiches and toaster pastries. However, it would soon become apparent that his first day as a small business owner wouldn't go anything like he was hoping for. After stocking his inventory, Jimmy somehow managed to start a fire when making himself lunch. While he was able to put it out, the whole episode would leave him a nervous wreck, although thankfully therapy is free in The Sims 2. After recomposing himself with a nice hot shower and struggling to hold down his burnt TV dinner, Jimmy finally opened the store and eagerly awaited the arrival of his first customers. However, even this wouldn't play out as anticipated. His first sales pitch was immediately shot down, and the rejection would result in Jimmy having an existential crisis and panhandling on the side of the street for a couple of hours.
Who killed Bojangles?
Yet things would end on somewhat of a high note, as he would make his first sale a few minutes before closing. Over the next few days, Jimmy threw himself completely into the business. He'd wake up early every morning to get the food ready, restock his inventory, and take care of any other necessary preparations. Yet Jimmy would also learn that grinding away in pursuit of your dreams can be quite the lonesome endeavor, although luckily the friendly neighborhood social bunny would show up to offer him some company and much needed emotional support. Jimmy's hard work would start to pay off as the store's popularity steadily increased with each passing day. Also fun to point out that a familiar face would end up stopping by. As we all know, Marissa's ability to process grief is almost sociopathic, and she didn't seem to have any qualms about doing some of her shopping in the same building where she once saw her fiancé burning alive. Anyway, with the simoleons now steadily rolling in, Jimmy was even able to save up enough money to buy a TV to help stave off his crippling depression. Sadly, he wouldn't get to enjoy it for long though, as a burglar would break in and swipe that shit before the week was even over. And if you're wondering where Jimmy was when all this went down, he had passed out in a bowl of cereal and slept through the whole thing. But when he did finally notice the TV was missing, he was not happy about it.
This sucks more than anything that has ever sucked before.
Shortly after this, Jimmy decides to switch things up a little bit and changes the menu from sandwiches and toaster pastries to spaghetti and macaroni, and both dishes quickly prove to be popular with his customers. Still, neglecting his mental health in the endless pursuit of ever so slightly increasing his profit margins would lead to another visit from the social bunny, and the two did not get along nearly as well as they did the first time. Man, is there anything more pathetic than getting your ass kicked by your imaginary friend? And the two would follow this up by having the saddest pizza party in history. So for the sake of his mental health, Jimmy decides to bring on an employee, and he settles upon Neil, as he's the cheapest option currently available. I had no idea who this Sim was, so I looked it up, and apparently Neil doesn't even live in Pleasant View and has to fly in for every shift. Talk about not knowing your worth. With Neil now frequently manning the register, Jimmy suddenly had a lot more free time and was now able to take care of many of the chores he'd been neglecting and even take up a new hobby. While most people may want to hold on to their first painting for sentimental reasons, Jimmy's first instinct was to try and sell it as soon as possible, and surprisingly it didn't take him long at all to find a sucker to pawn it off on. But it wasn't all smooth sailing from here on out. Despite his much improved skills as a cook, the occasional fire was still an occupational hazard, although to his credit, Jimmy did seem to be getting much more efficient at putting them out. The ghost of Jack Sleazy would also begin to make his presence known. In the first few times he popped up, it was mainly to bitch about how Jeff wasn't tending to the farm. Eventually though, his apparent resentment of Jimmy and his newfound success would eventually reach its boiling point. Jimmy was so shaken from this encounter that it was impossible for him to get back to sleep. As you can imagine, trying to run a business after a bout of insomnia is not the easiest task, although thankfully, like always, Neil was available to fly in on short notice and pick up the slack. Following the night from hell, Jimmy relegated Jack's urn back to the floor since his ghost wanted to act like such an asshole. Still, it was impossible to deny that the business was starting to hit its stride. Now Jimmy no longer had to worry about being able to pay his bills or keep his groceries stocked. He was even able to call on a professional now when things broke down, rather than having to rely on his own limited abilities. So it seemed like the ideal time for Jimmy to work on his personal life. Despite his new status as a moderately successful small business owner, Jimmy still occasionally found himself backsliding into depression. He'd long had his eye on Michelle, one of the customers who frequently came into the store. Despite his reservations, he finally built up the nerve to strike up a conversation with her, and the two would prove to have an instant connection. In fact, the whole experience left Jimmy so giddy, he'd write about it in his diary.
Hee hee. Oh diary, what a week.
A few days later, he would close down the store to invite Michelle over for lunch and to enjoy a rousing game of kicky bag. Naturally, after this, she was powerless to resist his charms. But as always seemed to be the case with Jimmy, it was 2 steps forward and 1 step back as things hit another snag when Neil suddenly and unexpectedly announced that he was quitting. The man was perfectly content to fly into work irregular hours for minimum wage, but being forced to wear a dumb uniform was apparently where he drew the line. Jimmy would confide about these issues to one of his customers, Shelby, and managed to form a fast friendship in the process, as Shelby found Jimmy's crotchety nature to be endearing. And Shelby would prove to be a true friend, as she would occasionally help clean up around the store and would even take Jimmy's weird schizophrenic cat painting off of his hands. Still, not having to pay Neil did have its upsides, as Jimmy was able to save up enough money to invest in a new pottery wheel. He quickly began to make plates with it and wasted little time showing them to his customers. He would also continue to refine his salesmanship, and while some people might describe his technique as hostile or overly aggressive, it was becoming hard to argue with the results.
That is a binding verbal contract. If they back out now, I will find them, I will strangle them, I will beat them into oblivion.
However, trying to juggle all of this stuff solo once again proved to be too overwhelming, and Jimmy was once again forced to bring in some outside help. And once again, the decision would prove to be a wise one, as a significant decrease in the amount of psychotic episodes Jimmy experienced was well worth the $15 an hour. He would also continue to tinker with the menu. While spaghetti had continued to be a fast mover, macaroni had lost some of its momentum, so he pulled it and replaced it with delicious, only occasionally burnt homemade pies. And it turns out that exclusively selling paintings, pies, plates, and spaghetti is a completely valid business strategy. He might not have been Daddy Big Bucks, but at this point Jimmy was firmly established as a successful small business owner. But there was just one problem. He still wasn't happy. After all, what's really the point in building something if you don't have anyone to share it with? So after closing down the store one night, he would call Michelle over and ask her if she wanted to take their relationship to the next level and become business partners. Michelle happily accepts and moves in, bringing a 10,000 simoleon investment along with her. She quickly calls in to quit her job as a hostess, and her and Jimmy then sealed the deal the old-fashioned way. Michelle would agree to take over the pottery production, and her skills as a hostess translated well to her new life as a saleswoman. However, part of the agreement was that Jimmy had to allow Michelle to use the store to work on her stand-up comedy routine. You know what they say after all, relationships are all about compromise. And that seems like a pretty good place to leave these two lovebirds. Hey, what's up everybody, Dusty here. I hope you enjoyed this video. If not, well then I'm not sure exactly why you're still here at this point. Anyway, if you did enjoy it, then leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel to be kept up to date with all my latest content. Or don't let me tell you how to live your life. As always, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again next time.